Okay, so there's a lot to talk about when it comes to this issue. I have seen just as many people who are upset with how things were handled as I have seen people who were ecstatic to see how this issue turned out. I myself have many thoughts about the issue, but we're gonna have to go ahead and actually cover what happened in this issue before we can discuss why people are going so insane about it. The issue opens with Whisper sitting alone, sipping on a drink. Cream comes up to her and the two begin to chat. However, Whisper quickly puts together that Cream isn't who she appears to be, and accuses her of being Mimic in disguise. Once she puts her money where her mouth is, Mimic gives up the ruse. Honestly, I'm pretty glad that they didn't try to keep up the whole Mimic disguising as somebody else angle for very long this issue. As soon as someone shows up who isn't Silver, Tangle, or Whisper, we would pretty much immediately know that they're Mimic. Just getting right to the actually important stuff makes a lot of sense here. There are also a lot of interesting details that I really want to point out. For one, in this panel you can actually see Mimic's suction cups on his hands, which is a tell that hasn't been relevant in the story up to this point, but it is nice attention to detail. At least it would be if he hadn't waved to Whisper in the previous panel, which would have instantly given his cover away. I'm joking, this doesn't actually matter, but I do think it's kind of funny. Also, why did he have Cream call Vanilla Mummy? Like, did he think Cream was British? What the hell? Anyway, that's about all the levity we'll be getting for just a little bit. The pair start to have a conversation about their past and the bad blood between them. Specifically, they talk about how Whisper seems to be moving on from her previous team. They talk about their ideals surrounding loyalty, whether having people you care about is or isn't a weakness, and it's all somewhat generic, but it is handled really well here. The panel where Mimic says that the reason the Diamond Cutters died was because Whisper was hanging back, that she wasn't there to protect them, that hurts. Like, that's a low blow, man. Eventually, we get the reveal that Whisper isn't here alone. She brought backup. Quick little detail I want to point out. In this panel, when Mimic talks about Whisper's vulnerabilities, he turns into Tangle as far as I can tell, which would make a lot of sense considering what he's talking about, but for some reason he's still using Whisper's color scheme instead of Tangle's for the skin tone. We know that he can do this since Duo is just Slinger with a different set of colors, but like, why did he do this? Like, am I wrong, or did he just transform into a Whisper and Tangle fan kid to taunt her? Also, once Whisper tags in Silver for the assist, she's just like sipping on her drink super casually. It's a really funny detail, I love that. After Silver intervenes and Mimic and Whisper yell at each other for a bit, Mimic activates his Flight Core, which got all the way back in the Bad Guys miniseries, and just juices it out of there. Silver tries to grab him and Whisper takes off after Mimic. Then Whisper calls up Tangle and asks if she still has her eyes on the octopus. Tangle says that she does, and that Mimic has transformed into a red quokka and ran into the market. This is a reference to Barry, the main character from Murder of Sonic the Hedgehog. It's kind of insane how many little references they're able to squeeze into each of these issues. Whisper heads into the crowd on her own, looking for Mimic. And of course, Mimic, being the stalker he is, tries to shank Whisper from behind, but the green wisps and the girl seemingly are too perceptive. The whips creates a gust of wind and sends Mimic flying into the air, where Silver ambushes him. I want to point out really quickly, I think the only reason that Whisper and the Wisp were able to spot Mimic was because Tangle gave them info on who he was disguised as. So this is yet another moment where the differences in their philosophies lead to Whisper getting a one-up on Mimic. Anyway, Mimic uses the Flight Core to overpower Silver's telekinesis and runs away. Tangle gives chase, and Whisper follows behind by literally rocket jumping, which is just so damn cool. Mimic and Tangle land, and Tangle just goes to fucking town on him. Seriously, the art makes this beatdown look really violent, and shifting to red and white makes this just look so intense. Mimic transforms into something out of desperation, sending Tangle backwards and nearly knocking her off of a nearby cliff. However, Silver manages to catch Tangle and Whisper tags in. Whisper gets her licks in and puts Mimic down. Then she aims her gun and begins to fire, and yes, she was just about to kill him. However, Mimic is a petty ass, and he stabs his Flight Core, causing it to explode. This sends both him and Whisper hurtling towards the river below. Tangle dives down to try and save Whisper, and Silver has to catch some rubble before it falls on some random civilians. Tangle barely manages to grab Whisper and her Wispin and calls on Green to save them. At that point, Whisper comes to, and they both look down to see where Mimic splashed into the river and presumably died. Then we get one of the most heartfelt sequences in quite some time in the comic. We see Whisper as she realizes that Mimic, the person who's been stalking her for who knows how long now, the person who killed the closest thing she had to a family, is finally gone, and we see just how much this means to her. The art really does speak for itself. Once everything is taken care of, Silver asks Whisper what she's going to do now. Whisper says that she doesn't know, and Tangle says that they should just go home. Whisper is a bit confused, and Tangle reiterates that they'll be going home together. Maybe I'm reading a bit too far into things here, but I feel like this implies that Whisper is going to be moving in with Tangle, or at least moving into Spiral Hill so they're closer together. Either way, if that is true, it's very cute. Another few things I need to point out, Whisper's exclamation that everything is finally over is the first time she's spoken in this comic that wasn't out of fear or panic. Not to mention that her eyes are visibly more open, and her mask seems to just be gone. I think that'll make talking to her wisps a bit hard, but I don't know, they can probably replace it with something else. The final page is a stinger for the next issue, which is cool, but like no one actually cares. Like, okay, they're gonna fight a giant robot or whatever, that's cool, but Mimic is fucking dead, guys, holy shit! Okay, there's just so much to talk about here, and I'm really not even sure where to start. I think what I'm gonna go ahead and do is take you guys through my experience reading this comic. Before I got to read it myself, I heard from several people that the ending of this issue was disappointing. Immediately, I was extremely scared. I really wanted Mimic to just be killed off at this point. I think it's the best thing they could do with his character at this point, and I was really worried that he'd just get away, or maybe Whisper would shoot Tangle on accident and we'd have a whole arc about her feeling guilty about that, or something stupid like that. So when I read the issue and saw that Mimic did die, and as far as I can tell, it would be a huge ass pull to say that he somehow survived this, I was honestly really happy. Like, I seriously cannot describe to you how relieved I was when that guy fucking exploded. Overall, I'm just really happy to see that Whisper is finally moving on and coming out of her shell to some degree. The final few pages give us so many small indications that Whisper is opening up and she doesn't have to be as scared anymore. And having seen her go through so much for so long in this comic, it's a real relief to see. And I do think Mimic is dead for good. I've seen some people saying that they think they're gonna bring him back or something, but like, this is about as clear as they can be that a character is dead and not coming back. It's about as much as we got for Starline, and let's be real, they're not bringing him back either. It is technically possible because we didn't like see his corpse or have it confirmed he was dead or anything, but like, we were never gonna see the corpse of any character in this, so this is the best we're gonna get. There are really only two criticisms I have for this issue in general. The first is that I don't necessarily buy Mimic's self-destruction here. Mimic is a character who up to this point has been portrayed as being willing to do anything he can to try and survive. I get that he was pretty much dead either way at this point, but it does seem a little weird that he would try to destroy the Flight Corps and just take Whisper down with him. But also, I can kind of see it if he really did believe that there was no way out at that point. It's not that weird. The other major criticism I have is one that I've seen a lot of people echo, which is that this kind of goes against what they seem to have been setting up for Whisper's character leading into this issue. Whisper was acting hella sus back in issue 76. Like, there's that whole sequence where Tangle's like, Whisper, you can't commit murder, and Whisper's like, sure, okay, and then basically tells Silver that she's gonna commit murder anyway. And all of this is being reframed by the annual we got with Mimic, showing why he's like this and showing the ways in which he and Whisper are actually pretty similar. I made a whole video about this, by the way, if you want to go check it out. The TLDR of that is that both Mimic and Whisper are characters who were defined by fear, and Mimic gave into that fear and chose violence, literally. So I and many others thought that Whisper giving into that fear and going down the path of violence would be bad for her character. It would be a step towards her becoming more like Mimic. So there is a sort of moral dilemma being built up to this issue, whether Whisper should or shouldn't just take Mimic down for good. But instead of getting an answer to that, Mimic just explodes and we just don't have to deal with it. I've seen a lot of people who are very disappointed by this outcome to that particular thematic through line. The fact that the moral question of killing Mimic just has no presence in this issue at all has left a lot of people feeling really burned. And while I do understand that on some level, I feel like people are also sort of losing the plot a little bit. I think it's worth pointing out that as far as I remember, we were supposed to be a bit further before the annual came out in the first place. Like, the entire story with Knuckles is building up to when everyone shows up on his island a bit later, which we know doesn't happen for a few issues at least, because it hasn't happened yet. We were supposed to see Mimic's death before we got that one shot in the annual, and I think knowing that kind of reframes how we should be analyzing it. That one shot with Mimic, it wasn't supposed to be a build up to his final confrontation with Whisper. It was supposed to be in memoriam. We were supposed to know when we read it that Mimic was already dead, that everything he did to try and survive was all for naught. The parallels between Mimic and Whisper that annual made so clear weren't supposed to be in our minds when we read this issue. They were supposed to be brought up after the fact. It's very possible that all the themes that annual set up weren't ever intended to be explored in this arc, and we're going to see them explored later on down the road instead. And I want to say here that people have a right to feel however they feel about a piece of art. If you feel disappointed by this issue, that's in your right. But at the same time, I think a big problem people have when it comes to analyzing art is getting upset that it isn't what they wanted it to be. This is especially bad with long-running, ongoing stories. Often people will get in their head a fictional version of what a show or comic or manga is trying to be, and then get upset when it goes on to be about something else. And again, while you do have the right to feel however you feel about something, I don't think that necessarily means that the criticism is valid. It's one thing if a piece is going out of its way to try and convince you that it's one thing only to just be something completely different. It's something else entirely to latch onto a few particular details in a piece, extrapolate from them a fictionalized version of what it could be doing, and then get mad when you're proven incorrect. And I think that's kind of what some members of the IDW community are doing with this issue. You know, I kind of wanted Whisper to go full on Punisher and have a bit of a villain arc after this, but that's not the direction they wanted to take the story, and I'm gonna have to deal with that. And maybe I'm reading too far into this, but I really feel like this phenomenon, someone taking a fictional version of what a piece is going to be and then getting upset when it proves to be something else later on, is kind of a big problem within the Sonic community right now. Hell, this is something that happens on the internet at large a lot, and I generally think it's not correct. You'll see this criticism phrased a lot as this wasted its potential, and then someone will say, well, you could have done this and this and this, and basically make up a totally different version of the story than what the artist was going for in the first place. Like some random examples off the top of my head, when My Hero Academia first started running, a lot of people got upset that Deku got a quirk at all. They saw the first episode and wanted it to be about a quirkless protagonist. And, you know, that would have been an interesting story, but it would also be a completely different story to what was being told. I think, generally speaking, you should criticize pieces of art for what they do and not what they don't do. Obviously, it's not a hard and fast rule or anything, but it's a perspective that I've tried to stick to more and more as time has gone on. The reason I bring this up is because a lot of people bring up exactly this sort of criticism against recent IDW. I feel like there are so many people who are upset with the book for not being as big as it used to be, for not being as grand or as emotional as it was in the past. And while you do have the right to feel however you feel, and I can't make you more excited for any particular issue of a comic. However, I think people have kind of a skewed perspective on the quality of IDW overall. I'm gonna say this, and I want you guys to know that I mean this 100%. There is not a single bad issue of IDW Sonic. Sure, there are things that I and many others have complained about, and that doesn't make them immune to criticism, but there is not a single issue that is so poorly drawn, so poorly thought out, so poorly written that it actually goes into the realm of a bad piece of art. Every single issue of this comic has artistic merit, and generally they're pretty high quality. I would say every single issue so far has been worth the money to buy and collect them. And I bring that up because that is not at all a guarantee when it comes to the comics industry. This is something that I've seen in full force when it comes to the DC crossover, which I will be covering probably next month when the final issue drops. It is so wild seeing the reactions from the Sonic fans and the DC fans when it comes to that comic. It really surprises me just how positive the overall reception to the run has been in the DC community and how weirdly negative it's been in the Sonic community. Like, the DC Sonic crossover is overall very celebrated. The Sonic fandom overall really likes it, but I've seen so much bitching about tiny little details in the Sonic community, and I just haven't seen any of that from DC. I think a really easy example of this is the reaction to the panel where Sonic blitzes Reverse Flash versus the fight between Metal Sonic and Batman. DC and Sonic fans both loved the fight between Sonic and Reverse Flash. It was funny and it worked for what the comic wanted. However, despite the fact that the fight between Batman and Metal Sonic is genuinely pretty good, so many people in the Sonic fandom complained that Batman shouldn't have been able to beat Metal Sonic because they didn't want to see their GOAT lose. And like, is that really what you care about when you read a comic? Like, is that what you read comics for, just to see your GOAT win over and over, no matter the circumstances? That approach to reading comics is what I associate with the worst type of Marvel and DC fans. I didn't think it would be that common in this community. I've also seen a ton of people complaining, like more generally, that ever since Operation Remaster, probably at the latest, that IDW hasn't ever really reached the same highs of that or the Metal Virus. And personally, I think that's true. I think those are the two best stories the comic has told so far. The thing that I think people don't realize is that those stories, the Metal Virus especially, are exceptional, not only in Sonic history, but I think in comic history. Like, they are just insanely good stories for how many limitations are placed on this comic. They're insanely good stories even not considering those limitations. The Metal Virus was so popular that they're making a Metal Virus Sonic toy. You know that no Sonic comic has ever done that before, right? I might be wrong about this, but like, can you consider how big of a cultural impact a run of a Sonic the Hedgehog comic has to have that they decide to make a toy for it? The point that I'm getting at here, and I am rambling to be clear, is just that people seem like they're asking for the absolute best at all times when it comes to this comic, and nobody can ever provide that. There are going to be issues where they stumble. There are going to be stories that aren't as good as other stories, but that doesn't mean we should throw the entire comic in the trash. And I think they've done an incredible job keeping the quality of the stories in this comic extremely high across the board. Seriously, other comics don't get this. Spider-Man has bad comics even to this day. Batman has bad comics sometimes. Everyone has bad stories sometimes. IDW Sonic legitimately hasn't. All of this is to say that I feel like people are being too harsh on this issue. Could it have been done better? Technically, yes. Could they have taken this in a more interesting direction? Technically, yes. But for what it is, for the story it's trying to tell within the limitations that are being placed on it, I think this issue was really good. I am really happy to see Whisper move on from all of this. I'm really happy to see that Mimic is dead and that this story is over to some meaningful degree. I'm excited to see where the story goes next. If you're bummed by this issue, if you think it's disappointing or whatever, you have the right to feel however you feel, but I really think it might be worth your time to take a look into how bad it could actually be in the wider comics industry and realize that we genuinely have it pretty good right now. Okay, so I know half of this video wasn't me even talking about the issue, but I just had to get these thoughts out of my head, okay? Issue 79, good. Mimic is dead, based. We're moving on. So it's time for that part of the video where I shout out all of my channel members. Huge thanks to Elric111, Agent B7, Bokabara, Sonic Storm, Mega Sonic Bros, Joseph Florian, Fate Testarossa, GB484, and Divin Higginbotham. I'm like nearly 100% sure I'm pronouncing that last guy's name wrong, but whatever. I'll see you guys all next time.